Oh, I was enjoying the light today. There's something about this time in the winter. The light changes. February is definitely different than January. And since it's gradual, you don't necessarily always notice it every single day, but there's a different quality to the light each of the months. And there's just that not only increased length of day, but increased strength of light somehow, or a different angle. I can't really put my finger on it, and that wasn't my interest today. I was just noticing that something in it was enjoyable. My heart was glad in some way with the light. So today, though, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the question, the koan sort of whether it's possible to enjoy things that are unpleasant. There are things that are unpleasant by nature, I might say, and then there are things that are unpleasant because of the mind state we're in. Do you know the difference? For instance, I don't know that there's anything intrinsically unpleasant about snow falling. But there are a lot of people who have aversion to it. It has a meaning to them, something to shovel, something to get stuck in. There's a not wanting it, not liking it. So in some cases, enjoyment involves noticing the aversion that your mind is in, the aversion your mind is creating, the not liking, and seeing if you can relax that, seeing if you can step out of it. And we step out of it often by stepping into what's actually present. I recall once when I was in graduate school, I lived with two other guys, and one of them had a dog, big black dog named Sarah. And when we first started living together, I hadn't really lived with a dog for many years, since actually I was a child. And I was a teaching fellow, so I had to dress up a little and go to class and teach. And I noticed when I'd come home, I would just be annoyed at Sarah because she was all happy to see me. She'd be happy to see anybody, really. It wasn't so personal, but she'd be all happy to see me and jump up, and her black hairs would just get all over my khaki colored pants. And I just felt this sort of annoyance about something I couldn't really control. And this happened for a little while in the fall when we first were there. And there was just this moment where I came home and I saw what I was doing, and I go, Mark, what are you doing? You could really enjoy this dog being all happy to see you. Who cares about your pants? Who cares about dog hairs? Do you really care about them? And I realized I had just sort of taken on some sort of attitude. I don't know, maybe it was my mother's attitude at one point, me coming home with mud all over me. I don't know what it was, but somehow I just stepped out of it. And there was this rambunctious and happy dog. And I just got down on the floor and kind of rolled with her a bit. and totally embrace the experience, literally embrace the experience. And it broke a kind of trance that I was in that had created aversion where it didn't need to be. So often we're doing that. We're creating aversion in the middle of things that are not necessarily unpleasant. Perhaps they're even pleasant. Goodness knows. As kind of rolling with a dog on the floor can be pleasant. But because of something in our own heart, we're not open to it. We don't want it. So part of our mindful exploration of enjoyment is to notice these moments of aversion to something that's not really intrinsically unpleasant. And to also notice when there might be something that's intrinsically unpleasant. Those of you who have sat with me for a while, or those of you on the retreat, have already heard this example, but it's one I love, which is when I was on retreat in Washington State at a place called Cloud Mountain. They had composting toilets. And composting toilet smell, that kind of acrid smell, is intrinsically unpleasant. There's something, that doesn't appreciate it in us human animals. And so, for whatever reason, I had chosen a walking path in between the sittings. You go out and you do walking meditation. I chose a walking path that would go, when the wind was a certain direction, the composting toilet smell would like waft right across the walking path. And I decided to just stick with it. And one moment of revelation was when I was feeling a lot of joy coming out of the meditation, and the sitting meditation, and I walked to the walking area and started walking. And when I hit the smell of the composting toilet, I felt that kind of burning in the back of my throat and the unpleasant smell. And I had this wave of joy come over me that composting toilets smell like composting toilets. Sounds a little strange, doesn't it? But in that moment when my heart was really open, it didn't change the smell. It didn't make it pleasant. There was no resistance to it, what it was. And in fact, there was a joy that it is what it is. It's just being itself. Whatever the gases are that are produced in a composting toilet, it was just being itself. It was just following its nature and putting thoughts to it. It wasn't really all that thoughtful. It was just, this is real. And there was a joy in it. So I'm laying before you these two possibilities to explore this week with the question, can something unpleasant be enjoyed? Is it enjoyable? To see how much you can recognize and even step out of aversion towards things that are not really intrinsically unpleasant. Or when things are intrinsically unpleasant, whether you can relax your aversion anyway. When you get to a certain age, there are aches and pains. Have you noticed? And I also notice there can be a tendency to be a grumpy old man when these aches and pains are there. There's just a kind of tendency to have the mind get a little hardened in the face of something that doesn't feel good in the body. And while this is an understandable reaction, one can even feel sympathy for it, it's not absolutely necessary. If one is unmindful, it just sort of happens. But if you actually show up in the experience, the grumpy, and notice it, this is the mind, this is aversion. This is the heart closed to an experience, not liking it. And even feeling, our sense of self with its desire to control feels a little insulted by the aging of the body. Because the aging of the body continues and happens despite the attempts of the ego to not have it happen. I think taking good care of yourself is always to be recommended. Exercise, eat well, sleep well, and you'll avoid some of the worst, perhaps, if you're lucky. But there you go. There's something in the body that's not happy. Is it possible? I'm not sure if enjoyment is the right word, but it might be. Is it possible to enjoy that ache or pain? Just ask the question in the midst of the experience. There are these complex human experiences that, kind of fall into a middle ground. I'll name one. The experience of having someone have a complaint about you. Now, that's not physically unpleasant, but most of the time there's a kind of a unpleasantness to it, you would say. It's a little like the composting toilet. I think, nonetheless, there's a huge range of being able to relax around it and not create aversion toward it, not become defensive. It's a wonderful area. I'm not, again, we're not necessarily, the word enjoyment might not apply here, might be too far of a stretch. But one might be able to come to closer to a neutral feeling in the midst of that. Just saying. And one of the ways I find is helpful is to kind of notice any tendency to be defensive that's coming up and just step a little aside and say, I'll figure out later if anything is true about me that's being said. I'll figure that out later. How did I raise my hand without doing it? That's interesting. I'll figure it out later. And right now, I'll just listen. Right now, I'll just assume this is about the person who's speaking and they want me to know them. And I can do that. I can know their suffering. I can know their perspective, how they're looking at this, how they took it and interpreted it. And in that attitude, it's possible actually to take this in and not generate much aversion. It's sort of the contract to postpone this, is it true? Is it true about me? Question. So these just occurred to me as things that came to mind in the sort of unpleasant stretch of life. And in our in our study of enjoyment, this class, it would be a shame if we confused enjoyment with just trying to make everything pleasant. It's not the same. And here's what's really powerful, I think, about the Dharma, is that it points to the way that whether our hearts are open to an experience or not, hugely influences what the experience is. And so, in our own kind of deluded mind, we think that there are desirable experiences out there to be had and undesirable experiences to avoid, and so forth. We kind of parse things out that way. And in reality, it's not that way. In reality, there aren't these clear parsings out of things. It's possible to stand before a beautiful sunset over the ocean and feel nothing. Even feel quite down. Has nothing to do with the sunset, has to do with the inner landscape. And anybody who has suffered from depression will know what I'm talking about. The inner landscape can completely paint over the outer landscape. There can also be the idea, though, I want to see the sunset over the ocean, and I'm in the car and I need to drive. I need to get there so that I can enjoy it. And the traffic's bad and something else goes wrong and you get there too late. And there's this whole kind of grasping after something. And even maybe you get there in time, but you're kind of grumpy, And you missed the whole ride there. You missed all the possibilities of enjoyment the whole way there, because your mind locked into, this is what I want. This is where the enjoyment is. It's in that future thing that I'm trying to get to. Thank heavens there's enough moments where we're, at the beach, and the beach is a pretty good place to be, and the sun sets and it's all enjoyable. But there's nothing intrinsically there. It's really very much whether our hearts are open or not. In the midst of a dreary day, there can be enjoyment. There can be enjoyment of kind of dark, muddy stubble fields with patchy snow in Hadley as it's raining and cloudy. It can be completely enjoyable. So that's our challenge this week, is to notice those things that are not being enjoyed, see if there's anything intrinsically unpleasant in them. Could you actually step out of your aversion? Or even to notice, what about being with something unpleasant? Is that possible? And what happens if you're actually willing, if you actually show up?